So I'm with Tony Venables, who is the founder of the ECIT Foundation in Brussels. Hello, Tony. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're based right now.
Okay, I'm based at home on the outskirts of Brussels, and I've been living here actually since the UK joined the European Union. So I've had a long career in European affairs. I started off as a Eurocrat, and I got bored with that. So I then took over the consumer lobby called BEUC. I don't know if you've heard of BEUC, but it's now quite a big outfit, quite a powerful outfit representing consumers. And while I was there, a lot of people were wondering how to deal with Brussels. So I set up ECAS, European Citizen Action Service, at the time when the Maastricht Treaty was ratified and free movement started. There was a lot of interest in getting involved in the EU. So we helped create a lot of new European associations. When I retired from ECAS, I got very interested in European citizenship and set up a foundation called ECIT, which is a think tank devoted to this theme. Of course, it's a theme that a lot of people touch on, people like New Europeans touch on aspects of European citizenship, but it seemed to me there was no organization working full-time on this. So I set up ECIT in 2015. And more recently, a task force of Erasmus students called Voters Without Borders, which is demanding full political rights attached to freedom of movement. And I think you would agree with me, Roger, that if we had full political rights attached to freedom of movement, Brexit might never have happened.
Well, that's certainly true. If EU citizens, the 4 million EU citizens in the UK had had the vote in the referendum, then Brexit would not have happened because on the whole, one doesn't expect Turkish to vote for Christmas, even though I'm not suggesting that EU citizens are in the UK are Turkish. And you mentioned Voters Without Borders, this European Citizens Initiative, which is happening at the moment. And I think it's a reminder that there's much more to free movement, Tony, isn't there, than just crossing borders. And I just wonder, you've been set it out. I mean, you've been a pioneer for free movement rights, European citizenship rights over several decades now, actually, and it made an enormous contribution, and building an important legacy for European citizens. But how did it all get started for you? How did this kind of interest in free movement and our rights as EU citizens, because of course our free movement rights became rolled up into this idea of European citizenship, as you said, at the Maastricht Treaty, but they predate that. What was it that sort of first made the penny drop for you, that there's actually much more to this idea of free movement and European citizenship than meets the eye, to put it mildly?
There was a very precise trigger, and that was a declaration by the heads of government that the single market was going to come into force on 1st of January 1993 for goods, services and capital, but not for free movement of persons. Although these four freedoms are supposed to run together. I mean, we've heard a lot about that in the Brexit negotiations. And that was a trigger for us to say, well, actually, this isn't really acceptable. why should people be left behind the market? So we launched a hotline, and at this point in history, I mean, this is completely unknown for a European outfit like ECAS to appeal directly to citizens. But people did respond very well and sent in their stories about, you know, the difficulties they had crossing the border. We did a report with all the case histories. We took it down to the European Parliament, where the MEPs organized a hearing for us. We had a lot of press and television, and we were very closely watched by the Commission, and in a sense, copied by the Commission. I mean, this was a catalyst. The hotline was very much a catalyst for the setting up of Europe Direct, Your Europe Advice, which actually still run by ECAS with a team of 60 lawyers helping people with their European rights. Solve It is another initiative. So I've been very much involved with all of that over the years. And I think the lesson for me is actually that freedom of movement has to be campaigned for. It's not that solid. It's relatively recent. And I think the fact that we were campaigning for it did make a bit of a difference, actually.
It's a remarkable story, and I think it's an inspiration to the young people you mentioned who are organising the ECI Voters Without Borders to give the full political rights to mobile EU citizens in the EU. Inspiration to initiatives like that today and many other civil society initiatives understand the role that you as a civil rights activist in those days and civil society organisations in general played in bringing about the successive development in the way in which free movement operates and the strengthening of our rights to freedom of movement and EU citizenship rights, the role of civil society. And we can look at that time and learn from those stories and understand that it really does matter that people engage and they join pro-European organisations and they campaign. But I want to ask you, Tony, I mean, the court has also, hasn't it, has also played a role in developing this. I mean, it is really extraordinary when you say, yes, when the four freedoms, the so-called integrity of the single market, the four freedoms, capital, services, goods, and people, the rights people were being dragged behind. And of course, as Britain leaves the European Union, we will still have freedom of movement of tins of tomato and Brussels sprouts and bags of potatoes, but we will no longer have freedom of movement of people. I just wonder whether at the time, perhaps people thought, well, we're not really talking about freedom of movement of people, we're talking about freedom of movement of workers. But of course, workers are people. I mean, you're not surprised by that, neither am I. We're both workers ourselves. But a lot of people were, and they suddenly realized that we wanted workers, we got people, and people have rights, they have human rights, and they have families, and they have all kinds of connections. And the court took a pretty dim view of that, didn't it? The idea that this was just about work's not about people. And from there, from some celebrated cases, European citizenship has been able to thicken and develop. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that the introduction of European citizenship in the Maastricht Treaty was a logical development because free movement of workers had been established in 1968, and it was only very recent history that it was extended to students and pensioners, self-employed people. So on top of that, the Maastricht Treaty, said that freedom of movement is a right of the European citizen, provided you have sufficient resources and health cover not to be a burden on the host member state. So freedom of movement has never been actually totally free or totally without conditions. it took some time for the court to react to the Maastricht Treaty, but when it did, in a series of landmark judgments, it made this actually a real citizenship. I mean, it established that you could go to court to claim your European citizenship against a member state which was trying to restrict your freedoms, and you could have a good chance of winning. I think recently, and this is partly an effect of Brexit, the court has become a lot more cautious. But I think you're right to say that it is essentially the court which put European citizenship on the map, and its case law was then codified in, what's called the Citizenship Directive, which is about free movement of EU citizens and their family members. Yeah, the European Court has played an essential role, that's for sure.
So yeah, the court has driven things forward and thickened up this idea of European citizenship, including our rights to free movement. But the campaigning has also continued, and the intellectual work and the academic work and the political work, and you've been absolutely at the heart of that all the way through, up to the point where you actually decided to set up the ECIT Foundation. So what is the ECIT Foundation, and what prompted you to do that?
That was essentially because although a lot of people relate to European citizenship, there's no organization which is devoting themselves full-time to exploring European citizenship. And it seemed to me that there was a gap there. I mean, the difficulty, I think, with European citizenship is that it can mean so many different things to different people. It can end up as a bit of an abstraction. I mean, there are some organizations which focus on free movement rights. There are others which focus more on citizen participation in EU decision-making. And then there's a third group which look at the wider aspects of a European citizenship, of belonging around Erasmus and other programs. And of course, a proper citizenship is all these three things. I mean, it has to be about rights, participation, and belonging. And those features have to stand together. So we started off ECIT by producing some guidelines to bring this very scattered transnational citizenship together and try to make it more understandable. And we've organized, as you well know, because you've been a very active participant, Roger, but every year we've organized a special conference to bring together civil society representatives, academics, and policymakers, because we saw a need for a lot more, not just interdisciplinary dialogue, but also dialogue across, different sectors to try to develop a consensus about how to develop this citizenship.
Well, you've had a wonderful convening power through the annual citizenship conference of the ECIT Foundation, and I'm delighted to come every year and participate, because you bring together such a wide range of individuals who are involved in development of our rights as EU citizens and free movement, particularly also from the Commission, the European Commission, high-level officials and rather senior members of the European Parliament, who are quite influential as well. And I just wonder, Tony, you said, at the start of this conversation 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, when you started out, there was so much to do to flesh out this idea of freedom of movement and then European citizenship. And you said, well, when we started, the Commission more or less copied us. Today, yeah. I think they listen, don't they? But I perhaps they're not just reading everything across into what the Commission and the European Union do that you might like. But are there things that you could still point to today where you can say it really is making a difference? They not only have they listened, but they've really taken on board and tried to change things, perhaps in relation to the European Citizens Initiative, perhaps any other aspect of our European
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Roger, that it's harder now to have an influence on the EU. The whole field is much more crowded. You know, there's a lot more lobbies around some 30,000 lobbyists around the EU. So there's a lot of competition. I mean, I think we can still have some success. I think the fact that we launched a citizens' initiative on political rights did lead the Commission to commit very quickly to revise the existing directives on the rights to vote in local and European elections in its legislative program for next year. We participated in a hearing in the European Parliament already. We've had about a dozen MEPs coming to our meetings, our virtual meetings this year. And in its citizenship report of 2020, which was published on 15th of December, the Commission does go further and sort of recognize that, okay, people can vote in local and European elections, but they can't vote in their country of residence in national elections. And some, including quite a lot of us Brits, can't even vote back home in national elections, which made it harder, of course, to win the referendum in 2016. It wasn't just the EU citizens in the UK who were disenfranchised, but people from the UK who had been living abroad for more than 15 years. I think we are on to something. I think that freedom of movement, we've all tended to rely a bit too much on our rights, on the courts, and that's fine up to a point, but the political discourse is very important. And if you've got an anti-immigration discourse, the rights get watered down and they can get seriously threatened. So the 13 million EU citizens resident in other member states need much more of a voice and more political clout, especially since the number has gone down from 18 million to 13 million with Brexit.
Well, as you rightly said, if the 4 million EU citizens in the UK had had the right to vote, Brexit wouldn't have happened. But now we're up against the stripping of rights, not just from the 4 million, but from the 65 million British citizens. And I know there are some people who feel that EU citizenship rights is, in fact, it's sometimes said it's a kind of fundamental status. And you might think that if one uses words like fundamental status, that it's not something that can easily or ever be taken away. What's your view about that, Tony? I mean, we really are at a moment, a very depressing moment in history, as 65 million people are stripped of their European citizenship rights overnight. But there are some people who believe that that can be challenged. And what's your view about that?
I think it can be challenged. I mean, it's very difficult. I wrote to Amber Rudd in the UK, Didier Reynders, who was then the foreign minister in Belgium, to Guy Verhofstadt, to the Commission president, about my own situations, saying I really found this intolerable. I mean, I'd assumed that I could remain a European citizen, and I got nowhere. I mean, I tried taking it to the European Ombudsman, who said that this is a policy choice to deprive you of your EU citizenship. It's not maladministration. And the lawyers I was who are helping me, thanks to an excellent organization called the Good Lobby, said it's going to be very hard to challenge a consensus among the institutions that if the UK leaves the EU, EU citizenship goes automatically with that, because it's linked to being a national of a member state. Of course, this can be challenged, and we're actually, as ECIT, we put in a request to intervene in the European Court in a case which will be heard probably sometime in the course of next year. And I hope that this case will be an opportunity to bring more out into the open, that of course it's not normal that 65 million people are stripped of a citizenship status without being properly informed that that could happen, without any process or let alone right of appeal. So yes, it's a challenge which should definitely be made and supported.
Well, perhaps one of the lessons from your 35-year involvement with this issue of European citizenship is possibly longer, is if you don't ask, you don't get. So we have to keep asking, and we have to keep hoping, and we have to keep fighting. But right now, it's a difficult moment. Britain is leaving the economic union, not just the political union. British people are losing their free movement rights. EU citizens are losing their rights to move freely, travel, work, and live in the UK. But despite all of this sort of doom and gloom, is there a positive message that you would take from this
I think
you have today towards the future? And what is it?
I think there is, actually. I think there's one thing we haven't talked about, which is worth looking into, and that's Schengen. After the EU said we wouldn't get the fourth freedom on 1st of January 1993, everyone waited for the Schengen Agreement to be implemented, which it was a few months later. And we did a hotline on the introduction of Schengen, which showed that this really was freedom of movement, in the sense that EU citizens had been able to move around reasonably well because we could invoke the start of the single market. But it was a real progress for third country nationals, because they no longer needed visas to go to other member states. They could travel with their ID cards. And so we spent a lot of time as a campaigning group for freedom of movement, following Schengen, actually, and watching its expansion. And I think a point to be made in relation to the UK, one point to make in relation to the UK, is that there was a lot of talk at the time of whether the UK could join Schengen. And the government at the time was pretty divided. There were lots of conferences and expert opinions. Some of them might be worth looking at again, because the UK was very keen to join aspects of Schengen, the security side of it, and the exchange of information, which was instigated through the Schengen Agreement. But it didn't want the abolition of borders aspect of Schengen. I think personally it was a big mistake by the EU to allow the UK to be somehow a sort of partial member of Schengen, or a hanger-on, in the sense that they could participate in some aspects, but without accepting the freedoms. Schengen is worth looking at because the UK is now in a situation where not only is it outside the EU, but it's outside a zone which includes non-members of the EU, such as Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, Liechtenstein. I mean, they're part of Schengen. So really, the UK is very much out on a limb in terms of freedom of movement. Perhaps this isn't sufficiently realized, but the UK, if I read, I admit I haven't studied every word of the agreement of Christmas Eve, but the UK wants to participate in all the security aspects of freedom of movement. And I think that pressure can be exerted to say, yes, but if you start to make life very difficult for people at borders, and if you don't envisage at any stage becoming part of Schengen, this security aspect shouldn't really be unconditional. I mean, I think conditions can be put on the UK, and I think one can protest about the position of the UK as not being properly balanced, because the security aspects are simply the reverse side of the coin to freedom of movement. I think the difficulty, though, which we saw with freedom of movement throughout the history, is that there isn't really an effective pro-free movement lobby. I mean, we were a disinterested lobby of essentially individuals, fighting the case of people who had been held up at borders for no real reason. But there are also bigger interests involved, like the hauliers, the professionals, the traders, and at some point they need to come together to make sure that free movement stays, and that even after 1st of January, that we don't just get a new border with the UK, which on paper could be far worse than practically any border that we have at the moment.
Well, the phrase, you don't know what you've got until it's gone, comes to mind. And I think it'll be a different situation where, as well as discussing freedom of movement at seminars organised by the ECIT Foundation in Brussels, we're having conversations about freedom of movement while we're standing by our cars and lorries in traffic jams leading into the port of Dover. It may well be that the importance of freedom of movement comes home to us at that point. Tony Venables, founder of the ECIT Foundation, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for everything you've done over so many years and continue to do and will do in the future for our rights as EU citizens and freedom movement. And thank you above all for, even in these difficult, challenging times, leaving us on with a positive note and a positive vision for the future, and the reminder that it really does make a difference if people get involved and take the future in their hands and campaign for the things that they believe in and the things that are right and things that can make life better and simpler for all of us. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.